Hello and welcome to TVB Pearl. Chief Executive John Lee today announced a full resumption of border crossings between Hong Kong and the mainland from next Monday. This means all of the city's land crossings will reopen, such as the Lo Wu and Hang Guang checkpoints. Travelers to the mainland will no longer be required to do PCR tests unless they have been outside of Hong Kong, Macau, or the mainland in the 7 days before crossing the border. Mimosa Ngai reports.
It was January 8th when the first phase of the resumption of border crossing between Hong Kong and the mainland took place. Now, the city is about to launch the second phase to achieve a full border crossing resumption on February 6th. This means there will be some major changes to the existing travel requirements. First, the current quota system will be scrapped for cross-border travelers, meaning there will be no restrictions on when and how many people travel. Second, travelers who have not been outside of Hong Kong, Macau, and the mainland in the week prior to their cross-border trips will no longer need to obtain a negative PCR test result from within the past 48 hours. Last but not least, the currently closed land crossings in Hong Kong will resume operations, including the Lo Wu and Huanggang checkpoints. Passenger clearance will also be implemented at Heng Yu Wai control point for the first time. Despite the many changes announced, Chief Executive John Lee said people coming from places except the mainland or Macau were still required to present a negative rapid test result prior to their trips to Hong Kong. Lee explained it is a necessary measure to protect the public.
This is really for the benefit of controlling the spread of the disease. It's really for ensuring that the public health is protected. It's for the people's overall good. But I will review it after a period of time, particularly after we have resumed normal travel with the mainland.
Meanwhile, Secretary for Health, Professor Lo Chung Mao said the number of positive COVID cases in the city has not shown an upward trend since the first phase of the border resumption, demonstrating that authorities can manage the risks after a full resumption with more people in Hong Kong. Authorities said public transport operators will be coordinated so that the service can match the opening hours of the various ports. Extra manpower will be deployed if necessary. Mimosa Ngai, TVB News.
Starting next Wednesday, cross-border students will be able to resume face-to-face classes in Hong Kong over 2 phases. On February 8th, cross-border secondary students will be able to resume face-to-face classes. Primary school, secondary schools, and kindergarten students will do so on February 22nd. Meanwhile, Hong Kong and Macau group tours will also resume with the mainland next Monday. With the Luohu port reopening on Monday, the MTR says it will prepare for the occasion by adjusting train services and increasing the number of rides to Lo Wu Station. The MTR believes that raising the number of rides could ease the border crossing process for both travelers from Hong Kong and the mainland. Timothy Lee tells us more.
After 3 long years, Lo Wu Station, one of the busiest border crossings in the world, will finally reopen next week. As a large number of travelers between the Hong Kong mainland border are expected on Monday, the MTR is set to increase the number of train rides to Lo Wu and Lok Ma Chau stations on its East Rail line to its pre-COVID levels of operation. For every 3 rides traveling up north, 2 trains will head to Lo Wu Station at intervals of 4 to 8 minutes, while 1 train will head to Lok Ma Chau Station at intervals of 12 minutes. Over the past 3 years, the lobby of Lo Wu Station underwent a full facelift in order to create more space to handle the people flow. Many people welcome the further reopening of the border.
I mean, I've worked in China before, so crossing, I do hope we can get back to where it was, but I think it'll take a lot longer than Monday for it to be back to the speed it was.
A lot of my students are actually from China, and now they can go back to China and visit their families. Their families can come to Hong Kong. So it's a lot less stressful now, and it's a lot stressful on people's mental health?
I think it's exciting that the borders are opening because it shows that Hong Kong is being progressive. I think closing borders is not for 2023 because we need more trade, we need to get money in and money out. So I think it's a good thing.
Many people have expressed enthusiasm for the further opening up of cross-border travel. Some residents said more tourists and investment are near in sight. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Beijing also announced the resumption of mainland tour groups to Hong Kong and Macau. After the news broke, the mainland saw an immediate spike in searches for air tickets and tour groups to Hong Kong. Jackie Lin with more.
A busy morning at the immigration office in Beijing. This woman described the hassle-free experience in securing her permit for traveling to Hong Kong, and she is ready to complete the application right after making an appointment online. This woman said the whole application process took less than an hour, adding she's very excited to visit Hong Kong after a long absence. Today, the central government announced the resumption of mainland tour groups to Hong Kong and Macau. Within half an hour after the news broke, search volumes for air tickets to Hong Kong on Mainland Travel platforms surged sevenfold. Traffic on online sales of tour groups to Hong Kong and Macau also jumped 18%. Some mainland tour groups said they will design new itineraries considering the changes in attractions in Hong Kong over the past few years. Tan Jie, Deputy General Manager of China's CYTS Tour, said their company would include more internet-famous landmarks and picture-perfect sites for tourists to post on their social media. Also gearing up for the comeback of mainland tourists are Hong Kong tour operators. Timothy Choi, Executive Director of the Hong Kong Tourism Association, said the industry expects to receive around 10 tour groups from the mainland in the first week after the border fully reopens. He said new go-to sites in these tours include the West Kowloon Cultural District and the Hong Kong Palace Museum, with new experiences to be included, such as taking water taxis or the Oriental Pearl Harbor cruise across Victoria Harbor. Chen Chi-Hua, chairman of EP Travel, noted a spike in popularity among their tour packages to the mainland for Hong Kongers too. He said with the PCR test mandates removed for cross-border visitors, it is more flexible for Hong Kongers to make travel plans up north. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
In its effort to attract tourists, Macau will incentivize more tourism by funding mainland and overseas tours in the enclave. Group tours will be funded under the condition that they stay overnight in Macau, with mainland travelers being able to receive up to 400 Macanese patakas per night. 120,000 tickets are also expected to be distributed in the mainland, Taiwan, and overseas to boost tourism. Macau authorities aim to attract 40 million tourists as their target this year. From January until now, the Customs and Excise Department has busted a total of 33 cases involving the smuggling of COVID-19 oral drugs with an estimated value of $15 million. Authorities noted that in 27 of such cases, the drugs were sent via mail to the city, with some involving over 100,000 pills. The remaining 6 cases were smuggled by plane from locations such as India, Bangladesh, and the Netherlands. Most of the seized drugs were not registered in Hong Kong, with one particular type missing certain stated ingredients. Customs reminds residents to seek proper medical help when infected and refrain from purchasing drugs of unknown origins. Welcome back. Hong Kong's retail sales rose 1.1% in December year-on-year, partly thanks to more people buying Chinese medicine. However, the retail sales value for the entire year of 2022 slipped nearly 1%, dragged by the economic fallout from the 5th wave of the pandemic. Total retail sales value in December increased to $33.7 billion. A notable spike was seen in the sale of Chinese medicine and herbs, which surged 16%. Some 7 to 8% increases in sales were recorded in categories that included medicine and cosmetics, motor vehicles and parts, as well as footwear and other clothing accessories. The biggest decline, meanwhile, was recorded in commodities in department stores, with a drop of 5.7%. Looking ahead, a government spokesman said the return of economic activities and an expected increase in inbound visitors should bode well for retail sales performance. A fire broke out in an elevator at Ho Lai Estate in Cheung Sha Wan. Police investigations are ongoing after the blaze was listed as a case of suspected arson. At around 4 a.m., a security guard at the building reported the fire to the police. There were reportedly sounds of explosion. After firefighters doused the flames, police seized a trolley in the elevator, which carried 3 burnt compressed gas cylinders. These cylinders are believed to have contained pesticide and lubricant. While no one was injured, authorities are now treating the case as suspicious with more probes underway. Overseas, Russian President Vladimir Putin Thursday used the commemoration of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in Stalingrad 80 years ago to rally Russians around his military campaign in Ukraine. Tracy Furness reports.
Stalingrad, now known as Volgograd, was the location of possibly the bloodiest battle during World War II, when the Soviet Red Army from 1942 to 43 broke the back of German invasion forces at the cost of more than 1 million casualties. Thousands of people lined the streets Thursday to watch a victory parade as World War II-era tanks, alongside modern tanks and armoured vehicles, rolled past and planes flew overhead. This Volgograd resident said, "My feelings are that our country is fighting for justice and freedom. In 1942 we were victorious, and it's still an example for the current generations. I think we will win now too." Putin laid flowers at the grave of the Soviet marshal who oversaw the defense of Stalingrad and visited the city's main memorial complex, where he held a minute's silence in honor of those who died during the battle. He also used the occasion to rally Russians in his war against Ukraine, evoking the spirit of the Soviet army that defeated Nazi Germany forces to defeat Ukraine that is in the grip of a so-called new incarnation of Nazism. In a fiery speech, Putin lambasted Germany for helping to arm Ukraine and said, not for the first time, that he was ready to draw on Russia's entire arsenal, which includes nuclear weapons. Those who are betting they will defeat Russia on the battlefield clearly don't understand that modern war with Russia will be quite different for them. We don't send our tanks to their borders, but we have the means to respond, and it won't end with the use of armoured vehicles. Meanwhile, the US has stepped up pressure on Middle East allies to expel the Wagner Group, a military contractor with close ties to Russia's president. Washington has slapped new sanctions on the Wagner Group in recent months over its expanding role in Russia's war in Ukraine. The Pentagon described it as a surrogate for the Russian Defense Ministry. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
European Union leaders are meeting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev today, with the bloc gearing up to impose new sanctions on Russia. Daniel Rao tells us more.
Russian missiles pounded residential areas in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk for the second time in 24 hours on Thursday. At least 5 civilians were wounded in the latest strikes, which damaged residential buildings, as well as a children's clinic and a school in the heart of the city. The bombardment came as rescue crews searched for survivors in the rubble of an apartment building hit late on Wednesday by a Russian missile that killed at least 3 people and wounded 21 others. Mayor Alexander Honcharenko urged residents to stay in shelters. The city is a major hub for the Ukrainian military in the east. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Kyiv ahead of a summit on Friday. Von der Leyen praised wartime Ukraine's brilliant application for European Union membership, though Brussels officials noted that Ukraine joining the 27-nation bloc is still a long way off. Ahead of possible membership, von der Leyen said the Commission is proposing that Kyiv join key European programs to give Ukraine benefits close to those of EU membership in many areas. The EU also demanded more anti-corruption measures from Ukraine, which is perceived as having endemic state graft, saying it must build a credible track record before joining the bloc. Zelensky had announced dismissals and investigations of some officials over the past 2 weeks, pointedly saying that Ukraine's defense ministry needs to be clean. Ukrainian authorities are investigating senior military officials in 2 cases of suspected corruption. Separately, a criminal group suspected of embezzling state funds by selling overpriced eggs and other foodstuffs to defense officials has been arrested. Authorities have also raided the homes of one of Ukraine's most prominent billionaires and a former interior minister, and announced an investigation into what they called a billion-dollar fraud and to the country's biggest oil company and refinery. Meanwhile, von der Leyen added EU assistance for Ukraine has reached 50 billion euros since the start of Russia's invasion. She said the EU plans to adopt a 10th package of sanctions against Russia before February 24th, the first anniversary of Moscow's launch of its invasion of Ukraine.
Today, Russia is paying a heavy price as our sanctions are eroding its economy, throwing it back by a generation. The price cap on crude oil already costs Russia around 160 million euros a day. And we will keep on turning up the pressure further. We will introduce, with our G7 partners, an additional price cap on Russian petroleum products. And by the 24th of February, exactly 1 year since the invasion started, we aim to have the 10th package of sanctions in place.
Von der Leyen also announced that the International Centre for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression in Ukraine would be set up in The Hague to coordinate the collection of evidence of war crimes. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
That's the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend ahead.